We begin Shabbos Daf Lamed Dalid with the Mishnah, which discusses a number of different halachas which pertain to just before Shabbos, and Bein Hashmashos, the period in which the weekday transfers into Shabbos. The Gemara will discuss those halachas, and then the Gemara will launch into a broad analysis of Bein Hashmashos and sunset in general, and nightfall, and when the day changes from one day to the next. We will begin the daf at the Mishnah, which is quite a few lines into the page, because we ended yesterday by reaching all the way to the Mishnah, because we were concluding the story of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. So now we will discuss the Mishnah, which has two halves to it. Each half has three parts. We are discussing the beginning of Shabbos. Now, when Shabbos arrives, there are three stages. First of all, you have before Shabbos. It's certainly Friday. It is not sunset yet. It's not Shabbos by all accounts. Then you have a middle stage, which we call Bein Hashmashos. It's not quite Friday, it's not quite Shabbos. There are certain halachas that apply then and others that don't. And then you have when Shabbos actually begins in finality, and it is finally Shabbos for sure. There's no doubt about it. So our Mishnah first says three halachas which apply just at the end of a Friday, before Bein Hashmashos, before it is questionably Shabbos. And the Mishnah says that the head of the household should ask his household three things. He should make sure that three things have been taken care of. First of all, he should say, make sure that you have taken meiser from all the food that we need for Shabbos, because it's forbidden to take meiser on Shabbos, because it's called fixing the food. It's like tikkun mana. It's like the isser of fixing things on Shabbos. You can't eat the food without having first taken meiser, and therefore you're fixing it if you take the meiser, and it must be done before Shabbos. Second thing is eravtem. You should say to them, did you make an eruv? This refers to eruv tchumen and eruv chatzeris. These are devices by which one may travel up to 4,000 amos outside the city, and by which one may carry from one courtyard to another courtyard. These devices involve some sort of kinyan, some acquiring of objects, and therefore it can't be done on Shabbos midrabanan. And the third thing you should say before Shabbos begins is light the candles. Now this is not a question, he doesn't have to ask them because he can see that the candles aren't lit, but he should say light the Shabbos candles, make sure we have Shabbos candles in our home. This is the first half of the Mishnah. Now the second half of the Mishnah lists three things that one is forbidden to do during Bein Hashmashos, and conversely, three things which one is permitted to do during Bein Hashmashos, and they are as follows. During the Bein Hashmashos period, which is not certainly Shabbos, but it's already after sunset, meaning it's after sunset, it's before twilight, so it's sort of in between Shabbos and the weekday. So the halachas are as follows. A person, the Mishnah says, is forbidden to take meiser from something which is most certainly obligated in meiser, because he's fixing it, and you're not allowed to do that on Shabbos, even though it's an Isser D'Rabbanan, because you're not really fixing it, it's not a visible fixing, but this Mishnah holds you're not allowed to do an Isser D'Rabbanan during Bein Hashmashos. However, he is allowed to take meiser from demai. That's something which is a suffix. It's not clear whether or not it was meiser. So you have a time which is whether we're not clear whether or not it's Shabbos, and we have food which we're not clear whether or not it's obligated in meiser, so you're allowed to do that. You're allowed to take off meiser just in case during Bein Hashmashos. Now, the next halacha that you're not allowed to do is to put kalim in the mikvah. This refers to kalim which became tamei. And again, it's a similar thing to taking meiser. You cannot use kalim that are tamei on Shabbos, and therefore you're fixing the kalim by making them appropriate for use by putting them in the mikvah. You cannot do that during a time which might be Shabbos. Now, the third thing which you're not allowed to do during Bein Hashmashos is you're not allowed to light the Shabbos candles. Obviously, that's an Isser D'Oraisa. Now, two more things which you are allowed to do is you're allowed to make an eruv. Now, this doesn't fit too well with the first part of the Mishnah that said you have to make sure that the eruv was made before Shabbos, and we'll discuss that. And lastly, you are allowed to wrap pots in towels or other things that can keep the heat, but will not add heat, meaning this is called the Isser of Hatmana, but you're allowed to do that during Bein Hashmashos. Now the Gemara says, where do we have a scriptural source? Where do we have a allusion in the psukim that a person should light Shabbos candles before Shabbos and make sure that he is light? Yeshua ben Levi says, "V'yadata ki shalom alecha." You should know that there's peace in your home. U'fakadata navcha v'leisechta, and command your family, and you will not sin. By having light, you'll have peace, and you will not come to any of errors. Now the Gemara says, interestingly on the Mishnah, that even though the Mishnah says that the head of the household should make sure that these three things are taken care of in the first half of the Mishnah, but he must say them gently so that he's not too tough and that his household will accept it from him. Now, Rav Ashi says, I never heard this, but I used to do it that way anyway. The Gemara now asks that there is a contradiction between the two halves as the Mishnah as far as whether or not you're allowed to make an Eruv during Bein Hashmoshos. In the first part of the Mishnah, you said you have to make sure the Eruv is made before Bein Hashmoshos. But in the second half, you said that you are allowed to make an Eruv during Bein Hashmoshos. So which is it? So the Gemara answers in the name of Rav Abba, in the name of Chi Bar Ashi. You said in the name of Rav. Before the Gemara says that, it introduces a mnemonic to remember all the things that combination of people said throughout the Masechta. The mnemonic is Gufi Zimratz Yipar B'Chavla de Melasa. In itself, a pruning, a bird in the rope of wool. So here we have one of them, and that is the following answer. He says that the first part of the Mishnah, which says that you have to make sure the Erev is made before Bein Hashmoshos. You're not allowed to make it. Bein Hashmoshos is talking about Erev Techumin, and the one you are allowed to do at Bein Hashmoshos is Erev Chatzeros. Now, what are these things? Erev Techumin is possibly a question of a Daraisa. That's why you can't do it Bein Hashmoshos. What is Erev Tchumen? Erev Tchumen is referring to the halacha, which might be deraisa, that you're not allowed to walk more than 2,000 amas from your place of residence on Shabbos, meaning you are at the center of a circle that extends 2,000 amas in every direction. Now, an Erev Tchumen means that you can move the center of the circle, and it's not where you are, but somewhere else. You do that by being what's called koneshvi. So you make that spot, you acquire that spot as your place of residence by setting up some food there. Then, if that spot is the center of the circle, and you're on the edge of the circle, you can walk 4,000 amas all the way to the other edge of the circle. Now, that's a question of a deraisa, so it has to be done before Bein Hashmoshos, as opposed to Erev Chatzeros, which is only the Rabbanon. When carrying within an Erev, there has to be a connection between all the different yards that are connected by the Erev, and that's an acquisition of bread from each member of the Erev, and that's only the Rabbanan, therefore you can do it Bein Hashmoshos. Now the Gemara brings an interesting related halacha. Rava says something about Bein Hashmoshos and Erev Tchumen. He says, let's say two people chose one person to be their shliach, to be their messenger, to set up an Erev Tchumen by placing food somewhere in a similar spot. So the person went and he had two Erev Tchumen with him, one for each of the people who sent him, and he set it up. Now, the first one, he set it up before Bein Hashmoshos began, but it was eaten by a dog or something during Bein Hashmoshos. And the other one, he set it up during Bein Hashmoshos, and it lasted until nightfall, until past Bein Hashmoshos. Meaning, one of them had his Erev exist during the border of certainly Friday into Bein Hashmoshos, but didn't continue to the end of Bein Hashmoshos into Shabbos, and the other one had his Erev exist at the border of Bein Hashmoshos to Shabbos, but not at the border of Friday to Bein Hashmoshos. So the question is, which one of these Erevin works? In order for an Erev to work, it has to be in place at the exact moment that Shabbos begins, but we do not know when the exact moment that Shabbos begins is. Sometime during Bein Hashmoshos, but we don't know where. So Rava's psak is that both Erevin are valid and they both work. So the Gemara says that's self-contradictory. How could that be? If you're saying that the one whose Erev was in place when Bein Hashmoshos began, if you're saying that that's valid, that means you're considering Bein Hashmoshos to be certainly Shabbos, and that's why the Erev was valid at the Erev was in place when Shabbos began because Bein Hashmoshos counts as Shabbos. However, if you're also counting the second Erev as valid, and his Erev was only in place when Bein Hashmoshos ended, that means that you're considering Bein Hashmoshos to be certainly Friday. And therefore, when Bein Hashmoshos ended, his Erev was in place when Shabbos began. So which is it? Bein Hashmoshos is either Friday or Shabbos, can't be both. So the Gemara answers, well, Rava is saying that it's a suffix d'Rabbanan, it's a question of a rabbinical halacha, and therefore we go l'kula both ways. For both of them, we're allowed to assume the lenient position, and they're both allowed to assume whichever halachic fact is advantageous to them. Okay, now the Gemara brings another halacha in the name of Rava. We saw in the Mishnah that you're not allowed to wrap, you're not allowed to insulate a pot that's hot with material that'll hold in the heat. You're not allowed to do that during on Shabbos. You're allowed to do that Bein Hashmoshos, but not on Shabbos. So the Gemara wants to know, why can't you do that on Shabbos? What's the problem? Why can't you wrap a pot? What's the issue? So Rava said, because we're afraid you may come to wrap the pot and you find that the pot's cold. So you're going to have a very strong desire to put it on the fire to heat it up. And that's a problem. We don't want you to do that. The Gemara says, hold on a second, Abaye asked Rava, how could that be the reason? If that's the reason, then you can't do that Bein Hashmoshos either. Bein Hashmoshos, you're not allowed to put it on the fire. So if you're concerned that he may come to put the pot on the fire to heat it up, then you shouldn't let him wrap it, even Bein Hashmashos, out of the same concern. So Rava answered no, because Bein Hashmashos is just the beginning of Shabbos. The pot's definitely going to still be hot. I'm not worried that the pot is cold. But if you let him wrap it sometime during Shabbos, maybe the next morning you may find that the pot is cold, and then he will end up putting it on the fire. Now the Gemara has another halach in the name of Rava about Hatmana, about insulating a pot. The halach is that it's forbidden to insulate a pot with any material that generates its own heat and therefore adds to the heat of the pot. You're not allowed to do that even before Shabbos. So Rav explains why. The reason is because if you let him insulate his pot in things which generate heat, he may end up insulating it with coals or with ash that has coals mixed into it. And that would be terrible. Abai says, what's wrong with that? Let him insulate it in the coals. What's the problem? He's doing it before Shabbos. So Rav answers, because if he does that, and it ends up being insulated over Shabbos, then he may rake the coals or stir the coals in order that it cook faster on Shabbos. So we don't want that to happen. The Gemara now spends a while elaborating on the concept of Bein Hashmashos, which is the time, which is the transition period of the day to the night. And if it's Shabbos that we are discussing, it's from Friday to Shabbos. It could also apply on other days that have halachic significance. So now, the Gemara says that Bein Hashmashos refers to the entire period in which the transition may take place. We don't know when exactly it is. Sometime during this Bein Hashmashos length of time is the transition. So the Gemara says the entire time span of Bein Hashmashos is a three-way suffix. It could be that any particular minute of the Bein Hashmashos is daytime, or nighttime, or a mix of the two. It could be the moment of transition itself. So at every moment during Bein Hashmashos, we don't know which of the three it is. Is it day, is it night, or is it the moment of transition, which means it's a blend of the two, and therefore the Gemara says, as far as halachos d'oraisa, we will have to go l'chumra, we'll have to take a stay on the safe side approach in all issues of halacha. The Gemara later will give specific examples of how that works. So now the Gemara says, first of all, how long is this Bein Hashmashos period? This period of uncertainty. How long does it last for, and when does it begin, and when does it end? So the Gemara quotes a Brisa which brings three opinions. They all agree that it begins when the sun sets. B'chokes Rishonim and Geonim, what that means. The simplest pshat is that of the Geonim and the Gra, when the disk of the sun disappears below the horizon. That's sunset. That is the beginning of Bein Hashmashos. Now, how long does it extend for? So we have three opinions. Rabbi Yehuda says it goes until the sky on the east, again, that's the other side of the sky, the sun sets in the west, the sky on the east has become black, both the part near the horizon and the upper part of the east. Meaning, right away, as soon as the sun begins to set, as soon as the sun sets, the eastern edge, the opposite side of the sky, the eastern edge is black. But it only becomes black all the way up when the Bein Hashmashos period is over. That is not a minute number, but that's what he says, that's how it's figured. Now, Rav Nechemia says, no, it's a set time. It's as long as it takes a man to walk half a mil, which is about 9 minutes. That's how long Bein Hashmashos lasts after sunset. And Rav Yossi says the whole thing is a blink of an eye. It's the day ends, the night begins, in a blink of an eye. That's how long Bein Hashmashos is. Okay, now the Gemara says, give me an example of a halacha that you have to go l'chumra, you have to take a stay on the safe side approach in all three halachos. Now the Gemara chooses the example of a zav. A zav is a man who experiences a certain kind of emission from the body, and the emission makes him tameh. Now there are three different levels of emission. If he saw one emission, he has a low level tama. If he saw two emissions, he has a high level tama. And if he saw three emissions in a row, then he has a high level and he has to bring a carbon. Now, how do you define three emissions or two emissions or one emission? So it's as follows. Two emissions in one day counts as two. Two emissions in consecutive days counts as two. Two emissions with a day between them doesn't count as two, just counts as one and then again one. Now, what's interesting is that if he has one emission, but it begins at the end of one day and continues into the next day, that counts as two separate emissions. And that's where we get our halach over here. So the Gemara quotes a brisa which says that if you have a zav, somebody who's experiencing ziva flows, and he sees a flow, he experiences the flow of this emission on Bein Hashmashos 2 evenings in a row. So let's say he has day 1, day 2, and day 3. So in the evening between day 1 and day 2, during Bein Hashmashos, he has one emission. And then during the Bein Hashmashos between day 2 and day 3, he has a second emission. So he has only 2 emissions, but the Gemara says he has 3 sfekos. It could be that he only has 1 day's emissions. Why would that be? If his first emission was completely in day 1, and his later emission was totally in day 3, then they don't combine into 2 consecutive emissions because there's a day in between. So therefore he only has low-level tumah. He only had 1 emission. He had it twice, but he only had 1. He didn't have 2 in a row. If, however, his emission both times crossed over the border from the day, meaning his first emission began in day 1 and continued to day 2, and his second emission was either in day 3 or day 2 and 3, then he had emissions in 3 separate days, and that counts as 3 in a row. Then he has a severe tuma, and he has to bring a carbon. Or it could be that he has only 2 days in a row. If his first day's emission counts as being in day 1, and the second day's emission counts as being in day 2, and nothing in day 3, or if it was just day 2 or 3, or something like that, then he would have only 2 days in a row, and he would have no carbon, but he would have severe tuma. Now, what if he only saw once, but it was during Bein Hashmashos between day 1 and day 2? So then he definitely doesn't have to bring a carbon, because he definitely doesn't have 3 days in a row. But we don't know if he had a 1-day tumah or a 2-day tumah. Does he have low-level tumah because his entire emission was either in day 1 or fully in day 2? Or does he have 2 days in a row emission because his emission crossed over, began in day 1 and ended in day 2? It crossed over the period of a transition between day 1 and day 2. The Gemara now analyzes more deeply the opinion of Rav Yehuda as to how you define Bein Hashmashos. So we saw that Rav Yehuda had said that Bein Hashmashos begins when the sun sets, and he gave 3 stages as to how you define the darkening of the sky. He said you have the stage when the eastern sky in the horizon is red. Then you have the stage when the bottom near the horizon is black, but the top is still light colored. Then you have the stage when the entire eastern sky, both the bottom and the top, is black. Now, Rabbi Yehuda had said that as long as it's red in the east, it's Bein Hashmashos. And then he said that as long as it's black only in the bottom, it's Bein Hashmashos. Well, that's a contradiction. When it's black in the bottom, is that already nighttime or is that Bein Hashmashos? So Gemara offers 2 resolutions to this contradiction. First of all, the Gemara quotes Rabbah. Rabbah says, no, you read the entire statement of Rabbi Yehuda together. When the sky is red, it's Bein Hashmashos. And when it's black in the bottom, it's still Bein Hashmashos. Oh, when it turns black in the bottom and the top, that's the beginning of nighttime. It's not a contradiction. However, the Gemara has another opinion, which is Rav Yosef. And Rav Yosef says, no, the 3 stages are the 3 stages of the transition from day to night. As long as it's red in the east, it's still day. When it turns black in the bottom of the eastern sky, that's Bein Hashmashos. So when it turns black all the way through the eastern sky, both the bottom and the top, that's already nighttime. Now the Gemara quotes additional statements by these 2 Manda Amrim in Rav Yehuda's Shita, Rabbah and Rav Yosef. And the Gemara says that these next 2 statements are consistent with what they said earlier. And here we have that the 2 opinions here give numbers for how long the Bein Hashmashos is according to Rav Yehuda. So first of all, we have that Rabbah says in the name of Shmuel, it's 3 fractions of a mil, meaning the time it takes to walk a mil. A mil is about 18 minutes walking time. So the Gemara says 3 fractions. Well, what fraction? If it means 3 halves, then he should have said 1.5. If it means 3/3, then he should have just said a mil. He must mean 3/4 of a mil, which is about 13.5 minutes. Okay, that's Rabbah. And now Rav Yosef's view is he says 2 fractions of a mil. So Gemara says, well, what did he mean? If he meant 2 halves, so he should have just said a mil. If he meant 2 quarters, then he should have just said half a mil. He must mean 2/3 of a mil. Now the Gemara says, okay, what is the difference between Rav Yosef's opinion and Rabb's opinion? What is the difference between 3/4 of a mil and 2/3 of a mil? Gemara says the difference is 1/12.